U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan. Good morning, Senator Sullivan.
Hey, Dan. Good morning. Happy Friday. Great to be home.
What?
I just got in last night after a pretty important week in the U.S. Senate this past week.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you about that, but I want to start by talking about what's going on in our nation with this economy. We've seen wages increase at an unprecedented rate. The jobs numbers that just came out were higher than we expected. Payrolls rising, more workforce participation, lowest unemployment rate for minorities ever. Things are really clicking, Senator.
Yeah. Well, look, you may have watched, and I'm sure a lot of Alaskans did, the State of the Union, which was also took place this week. And you're exactly right. The media doesn't like to report on it, but this economy is really, really on fire. And why is that? It's not a mystery to a lot of us, Dan. When I ran for the Senate in 2014, to me, the basics were pretty much there. If you don't overburden the American economy, right? So less job-killing regulations, tax rates that are fair, not too burdensome on American families and small businesses, unleash the power of American energy, which is such a gift that our nation has relative to any other country, and you let that happen, as opposed to what we saw with the previous administration, which was to overregulate everything. The U.S. economy, the worker, which is the best worker, our American worker, best worker in the world, will take off. And that's what we've done. That's what the Trump administration has done in conjunction with the Senate Republicans. And we're seeing the results, as you just said. Now, we need to bring that economic dynamism here to our state. I think we're on the verge of it, but you're exactly right. What the president described as a blue-collar jobs boom. You just saw the numbers this morning. Knock the socks off the expectations. Again, I think it's 240,000 jobs created just in January. And here's a really important point, Dan. The choice that's going to be on the ballot in 2020 couldn't be starker, right? We are focused on less government, more economic freedom, trade deals that don't hurt us, right? We've had recently some really good news on the trade front. China trade deal, the USMCA, is going to help our fishermen. Huge.
Well, I know you were very instrumental in getting that fisheries component into that trade agreement.
I talked to the president and his team about our great fishermen. We're the superpower of seafood, I like to call it. It's almost 60% of everything harvested in America comes from Alaska. But here's the big choice. The Democrats are going the other way. Their lead candidates, Warren and Bernie Sanders, are literally looking at socialism, are literally looking at, the Venezuela model. I mean, these guys can't even count the vote in Iowa, and they want to nationalize health care and do this Green New Deal, which will cut our military and shut down resource development in Alaska. Big choices for 2020, but you're right. This is not a surprise to me. You unleash the American economy, the Alaska economy, and our workers will create a strong growth and opportunities for Alaskan and American families.
We're talking to Senator Dan Sullivan, who represents the state of Alaska in the U.S. Senate. Senator, what's your take on this whole saga involving impeachment?
Well, look, Dan, this was only the third time in U.S. history that this has happened. And, what I told my fellow Alaskans I was going to do is take my constitutional responsibilities very seriously. I encourage people to go to my Facebook page and look at not only the statement, but the longer statement we submitted for the congressional record. And, we did hear from thousands of Alaskans where we have a lot of opinions, and I want to thank everybody, regardless of where you were on the spectrum of views, for weighing in my office. But here's the big issue, is that everything that happens in these impeachments, whether it's in the House or in the Senate or the arguments that were made, sets a precedent for our nation. That's really important. So from my perspective, we had to look at the entire record, not just the arguments made by the House managers, the Democratic House managers, but what they did last fall. And what they did last fall was something never been done in history before. They unleashed, for the first time in American history, despite warnings from the founders like Alexander Hamilton not to do it, the first purely partisan impeachment in American history. Nobody thinks that's a good idea, that if you weaponize impeachment as a regular form of partisan warfare, where it's trotted out every 2 or 3 years, that's good for America. Nobody thinks that's a good idea. So that was number one.
Can you kind of walk me through that process of your impeachment decision? What was it that you were considering as you were going through all that?
So as that's a great question. Like I said, and I really would, because this is very important, encourage my fellow Alaskans, to take a look at the statement I put out for the record and what I put on my Facebook page. But it wasn't just the precedent, right, of what was happening. That was also the most rushed, the most unfair, and the most partisan impeachment ever. And that's not an opinion; those are just facts, right? And that was because Speaker Pelosi had this Christmas deadline to impeach the president. So then they throw it over to us, and I think, Dan, what was missed by a lot of people is that what the what the House managers were asking us to do was not just overturn the 2016 election, but to remove the president from the 2020 ballot, as primary voting in Iowa already had begun.
Right.
And this is never been done in history, but a political step, radical as can be, that would have done infinitely more damage to the legitimacy of our constitutional republic than anything else. And here's the bottom line, and I think it's a really important issue, and I put it in my statement. I trust the American people. I trust Alaskans with that decision. That's what the founders wanted.
That's really really it. Not
the House Democrats.
Sure. We're talking to Senator Dan Sullivan. Senator, I was so impressed with you, sir, when you had some fire in your belly when you were taking on the Democrats. They're trying to, once again, lock up Anwar, and you were giving them hell.
Well, look, Dan, this is, I have a strong record of getting things done in the Senate, and a lot of that is because I have good friends, both Republicans and Democrats. I try to work with everybody to move forward on issues that matter to Alaska and our country. But what is a common theme, and it comes out on the Environment and Public Works Committee, on which I sit, because there's a lot of extreme left-wing Democrats, Bernie Sanders, this guy named Senator Merkley from Oregon, on that committee. What comes out in Ed Markey from Massachusetts is these guys are constantly trying to make policy and influence decision-making at the federal government level and in the private sector to make sure Alaska's economy can't grow. Happens all the time, and it drives me nuts, because I look at these guys and say, hey, you're always focused on my economy. Why don't you focus on your own economy? What I said the other day in this hearing was, I've taken the train up from D.C. to New York City. Geez, Louise, you want to talk about economic wasteland? Just look at that. You're telling me how to, do responsible resource development in Alaska? But the latest is over one third of Senate Democrats have written, and almost all the Senate president candidates have written the biggest banks in America and said, we really want to pressure you not to invest in Alaska in the Anwar region. And I said to them, A, I would never do that to your state, and B,
it is an attack.
It's just remarkable. And here's my point: if these guys ever get power, if they control the Senate after the 2020 election, or the White House, our economy will be toast. And that is a fact, because every single one of them seems to want to make sure that, hey, I'll throw a bone to the extreme radical enviros who fund a lot of these guys. and I'll make sure that we just shut down Alaska. We don't care. There's only 730,000 people up there. And I fight this hard, and I get so mad about it because it's just unfair. And I'll tell you this. I told them, I said, look, you have no idea what you're talking about. By the way, what resource development has done in my state, it's not only created great jobs for hardworking men and women and our families, but it's lifted some of the most poverty-stricken Americans in our rural communities out of poverty. It's given them things like schools and clinics and gymnasiums and clean drinking water that most Americans take for granted, and yet we don't even have. And so I'm ready to rumble on this again. It saddens me, to be honest, but it's a never-ending assault. And it is. And I told them, hey, look, I work with you guys. I'm bipartisan here, but let's call the facts out. This is done by the Democrats in the Senate. My Republican colleagues don't do this. It's the Dems. And if we let them get control of the levers of government, imagine Chuck Schumer's Senate majority. He will shut down our state. And not to mention take away your Second Amendment rights and gut the military. They all say it. It's big. It's game on. But I get a little jazzed when it comes to this, Dan. Sorry.
Well, we appreciate that about you. And unfortunately, I am out of time. But it's always great hearing from you, and I really appreciate you calling in and keeping us up to date with what you're doing. You're doing a great job, and we're behind you.
Thank you, Dan. And again, if people really want to take a look at some of the deeper issues and impeachment, I'll leave it with this. I know we got to run. About 3 weeks ago, I was at the gun show out in Wasilla, and I had a veteran who came up to me and he said, Senator Saul, this is right before impeachment. He said, protect the Constitution. Protect the Constitution. And he said it with a little trepidation, like, my goodness, there's attacks on the Constitution. I couldn't agree more with him. What we did, ultimately, I believe, in this impeachment trial, if you look at my reasoning and the votes we took, is that we did that. And, you know, part of our message to the House is, from the Senate, don't do that again, okay? A rushed, partisan, unfair impeachment, it's not good for the country.
Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. Have a great weekend, sir.
Okay, Dan. You too.